At the end of this month, massive cuts to spending and across-the-board tax increases kick in the United States unless Congress can come up with a compromise. But despite President Obama's decisive election victory just a month ago, it seems that he's still not getting his way on Capitol Hill. The consequences are pretty dire. Some economists saying the fiscal cliff would cut 4% of America's GDP overnight and throw them straight away back into a recession. And that could have a ripple effect around the world. We'd even feel it here, according to Penny Wong last night. Dr. David Smith is a lecturer in politics and foreign policy at the United States Study Centre at the University of Sydney. David Smith, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Now, this fiscal cliff, it sounds dramatic. It's also referred to as sequester cuts and so on. What is actually going to happen at the end of the month if they don't come up with a deal?
So at the end of the month, the first thing that will happen is that tax cuts for everyone that have been in place since 2001 will expire automatically by law. So everyone's first couple of paychecks of 2013 will be noticeably smaller. The second thing is that government departments will have to start thinking about how they are going to make these cuts that will be imposed on them. And that goes for organisations from national parks to the Pentagon. It will perhaps not have as dramatic an immediate impact as some people are talking about. It will probably take a few weeks for government organisations to actually start making cuts. So everyone will keep turning up to work in those first few weeks. The most notable impact will be on those paychecks. And there's also speculation that the financial markets might respond to it very badly.
Back in the mid-1990s, there was a shutdown of the federal government at the time of Bill Clinton. And at that time, Republicans, led by Newt Gingrich, ended up getting a lot of blowback because they were the ones that had made this happen. And are Republicans concerned they could see a repeat of that now?
They are. The real question is how long it would take. I think that there's very little question that if the fiscal cliff was allowed to happen and allowed to take place over 6 months or a year, that would definitely lead to a recession because you're suddenly taking a lot of government money out of the economy, you're reducing people's own ability to spend. But it might actually be a few weeks before any real pain is felt. And so it is actually possible that Republicans will wait for the fiscal cliff to happen, wait for those automatic tax cuts to take effect, and then vote for a package that extends the tax cuts on the middle class, but not on the very rich.
Now, this was something that Barack Obama campaigned on. He now says he has a mandate for. We're going to preserve these Bush-era tax cuts for everybody under $250,000 a year.
That's
but the
right.
super rich, we are going to make them pay more. Not a lot more, but up from mid-30s to high 30s as a percent of their income.
That's
that
right.
argument of having a mandate, how's that going down on Capitol Hill in Congress?
It's not going down very well. Even when you consider the fact that the Republicans actually lost the popular vote in the House. I mean, their Republicans are more evenly distributed across the country, so they were able to maintain their House majority. But no, they definitely don't have the same kind of mandate, the Republicans, that they had after the election in 2010, which was one of the biggest swings in post-war history.
And yet almost all Republicans can equally say, I was elected on a promise, and most of them signed up to the so-called Grover-Norquist pledge to say, I will never increase your taxes. I wouldn't be here in the House or the Senate if I ever was going to raise taxes. Do they have a fair argument?
They do, but allowing the fiscal cliff to happen would allow a useful little bit of casuistry here because the tax cuts will expire automatically. That's written into the law. And then they would actually be voting for tax cuts on a particular group of the population, the middle class. They wouldn't actually be voting for a tax increase on the very rich. That would just be something that happens
automatically. It's a get-out-of-jail card. They can say, we voted for tax cuts after the tax increases came in automatically, nothing to do with us.
That's right. They're not talking about this openly, but this is a useful little strategic out for Republicans. And if this takes place in the first couple of weeks of 2013, so just long enough for people to see the consequences to their own paychecks of no deal getting done, but not long enough to seriously damage the economy, this might actually be the most amenable outcome for everyone.
Now, Judith Sohn, you've looked at the prospects of a total economageddon in the United States and elsewhere if the fiscal cliff is gone off.
Well, I don't believe in that yet.
You don't think it's going to happen?
Oh, well, look, I agree with many of those points. I mean, the thing is, of course, the kind of notion of a cliff is that it's at one point and then they can't fix it. That's not right. They actually could fix it sort of many months into the calendar year. I'm all for them actually going over the cliff, to tell you the truth, because the deficit and the debt are just completely out of control. And, you know, this idea of fiscal consolidation, but not now, you know, very St. Augustinian, I just don't believe it. I mean, the thing that worries me is that if you look at the cliff, it is a lot about tax rises and not much about spending cuts. I think, you know, so I'm not kind of happy about the composition of that, you know, travel over the cliff. But, you know, they have to do something about repairing the state of government debt in the US, and there's no time like the present. I mean, my view would be this, that, you know, the stimulus didn't do much in terms of adding to GDP, so, you know, taking this away may not in fact have the impact on GDP that a lot of people think. And there are a group of economists who are all for doing the Thelma and Louise.
A couple of $100 billion out of the American military, David Smith. I guess some would say, well, you know, we're drawing down in Afghanistan, we're out of Iraq, we don't need a wartime decade-strength military. Maybe Conservatives need to make those kind of cuts.
Yeah, look, I would certainly agree with that. I think that in the Republican Party, now more than ever, there is actually an appetite in some important parts of the party for perhaps putting military cuts on the table along with everything else. But there are a lot of congressmen from districts which are dependent on military spending. If you especially look at the southeast of the United States and the amount of military facilities there and the levels of industry that are dependent on military contractors, you know, this is a very important part of the economy in certain parts of the country. The military has become so entwined with the economy that it's going to be hard even to do that without some kind of economic pain.
Well,